Chapter 16. Imogen was mucking out the llama barn when she heard rustling in the woods. She looked up, wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of a gloved hand, and thanked Mother Nature that it was only 50 degrees out. Taking care of animals was harder than the hobby farmers on Instagram made it look. The rustling continued, and since Cookie didn't seem to be bothered, Imogen assumed it wasn't a bear or anything equally sinister. She stopped to watch it emerge from the other side of the paddock, while one of the llamas, Murray, came over to cush down exactly in the spot where she was working. Excuse me, mister, personal space much? Murray just looked at her. Quickly, Imogen realized the noise was not one, but 2 horses walking the deer path. Luckily, these weren't loose, and Gabe led the way, mounted on Rowdy and ponying another small horse behind him. He saw her in the paddock and called out a friendly greeting. Sorry, was going to wave, but have my hands full with these 2. Yes, they look incredibly wild. I don't know how you survived the trip. Funny girl. Imogen shaded her eyes to look up at Gabe. It was hard not to admit to herself how attractive he was when he looked like a cowboy out of a movie or a Western romance. Looks like a beautiful day for a ride. Why do you have 2? It's good to pony them from time to time for exercise and to get them used to leading or following. But I thought we'd take a ride. Imogen was confused. Yes, I see that. It's a lovely day for it. You and me, Imogen. Jo told me she's worried you aren't having any fun. I know you have been thinking about riding again, so I figured, why don't we go out and you can exercise Dexter here? Win-win. Jo, huh? That sly fox. The latter was said under her breath, but damned if her aunt wasn't trying to set them up. Still, she was excited at the idea of a little time in the saddle. Yep. And she said to tell you that the mucking can wait, and everyone deserves a little downtime. Imogen put the rake down on the outside of the fence and took off her gloves, sticking them in her back pocket. Gabe didn't think she realized how quickly she was getting the hang of being a farmer, but already knew better than to say anything. But she looked quite the picture in her messy bun, glowing face, and work clothes. It shouldn't have been as attractive as it was. Man, she was cute. Let me go on up to the house and make sure Jo has what she needs. I don't want to leave her on her own for long, she warned. Gabe nodded. We'll take a quick ride on one of my favorite trails, then be back in time for you to finish your chores. I promise. Be back in a second. Imogen ran up to the house and was true to her word, coming back quickly with her aunt hollering at her to have fun and enjoy herself. Gabe had dismounted, tying up both horses at the hitching post while he waited, and checked girths, leathers, and the saddlebags to make sure everything was in good shape. Satisfied, he looked down at Imogen. God, she was a little thing. He hadn't known her long, but her personality made her seem larger than life. Occasionally, he was reminded she was a peanut, especially compared to him. Okay, it's been a while. You said you've ridden, but what exactly do you know? Well, I was a jumper for my entire teens and then quit riding when I went to college. I haven't been back on a horse since, except for the occasional vacation ride. All right. English tack is like Western in some ways. I ride Western because it's more comfortable for me on the trails, and I do some minor search and rescue, so I need to bring gear with me for camping and emergencies. With a Western-trained horse, keep a loose rein. You don't need to hold them in contact like you do a jumper, and keep your hands low on the withers. If you raise your hands, they go faster. At her nod, he continued. More important is your seat. Use your body first. Dexter here is a babysitter. He doesn't mind a mistake and will only go if you tell him. Got it? Got it. Imogen continued scratching the beautiful Palomino's neck, while Gabe explained how they were going to take a well-marked trail and take it easy for the first ride out so she could get a feel for it again. Okay, let's get you mounted up before that boy falls asleep under your touch. Need a leg up? Actually, yes, please. I've never liked mounting from the ground. It puts too much pressure on their ribs and back. Gabe leaned over, hands in a basket, and gave her a leg up into the saddle. Satisfied at how she controlled her seat so as not to flop down on the horse, he handed her the reins and then untied both horses. Without another word, he mounted up and directed Rowdy back toward the deer path, Imogen and Dexter following behind. This is amazing! Imogen laughed out loud. It didn't take her and Dexter long to figure each other out, and Gabe was right, he was a babysitter. The deer path was narrow, but he directed her to a beautiful, wide trail that was obviously well used, and she was able to get her bearings once again. It was like riding a bike. She couldn't believe how quickly she remembered how to ride. Sure, the steering was a little different in the reins. He called it neck reining, but the body language and leg pressure was the same. When they'd reached an open field, Gabe asked her if she wanted to lope, and she jumped at the chance. He was impressed. She'd obviously ridden before and seemed like an instinctive rider, going with the horse and learning his cues quickly. Dexter had a great lope, and he and Rowdy took point on the inside of the field, just in case she lost control. They rode side by side, and he couldn't help but appreciate how her hair had come undone from the bun and flowed behind her, shining brightly in the sun. But it was the look of utter happiness on her face that made him catch his breath. As they reached the end of the field, he indicated they should slow down, and she followed his directions perfectly. She was out of breath, but in the best way. Wow, I can't believe I haven't done this in so long. I've been missing out. Gabe grinned over at her, patting his Mustang on the neck. Rowdy was still ready to go, but Gabe held him easily, and he settled down after a few minutes. You and Dexter looked good out there. He needs the exercise, so anytime you want to ride him and I'm available, just let me know. Imogen gave him a big grin in return, then dropped her reins to scratch both sides of the gelding's neck at once. He sneezed and dropped his head. He's a good boy. Thank you for getting me off the farm to enjoy this beautiful day. It's so gorgeous up here. It's home. Fall is my favorite season, especially when it comes to riding. They rode side by side, slowing as they walked downhill. The trees began to thin, and a green building appeared in the distance. Imogen squinted. Is that a building over there? I have no idea where I am right now, she said with a good-natured laugh. That's Smithfield Show Stables. It's on the other side of the mountain. We kind of went up the foothills and back down the other side from the farm. Oh, sure, that makes sense. It probably isn't that far as the crow flies. Well, we've been riding an hour already, so we should probably turn around and head home. I usually go around the facility and back up a different trail that is more winding, so it isn't as strenuous on the horses. Sounds good to me. Let's do it. You really are game for anything, aren't you? You know it. Rowdy and Dexter drew a lot of attention from the horses in the small paddocks, and most of them called out in greeting or walked over to investigate the newcomers. The thundering of hooves drew their attention to a round pen closer to the barn. In the center, Fortune was galloping in circles, periodically throwing a buck or adding in a rear for good measure, before landing and doing it all over again. It wasn't long before they could see the foam on his haunches, even from afar. Imogen frowned as Dexter began jigging. It's okay, buddy. That's Fortune. Fortune ran directly at the gate, only stopping an inch from it. Imogen was worried he'd be hurt and said as much to Gabe. This isn't good for him. I wonder why he's so worked up. At that moment, Laura and Bianca walked out of the barn in deep discussion. Seeing the two riders together, the latter frowned before covering it up quickly and calling out, Gabe, hi. Are you coming to visit me? He didn't answer her question, instead asking them both, What is going on with Fortune? Why is he so worked up? Honestly, we're not sure, Laura answered. He's getting progressively worse, and I can't determine what his triggers are. I would think he's neurological, but you've already tested him for that and he's come back clean. I'm not sure I can keep him here much longer, for his safety and for our other horses and students. Bianca and I were just discussing our options. Bianca chimed in. When I got him, he was so sweet and calm. I honestly can't understand what is going on here. My father thinks I should just get rid of him. Imogen piped up. So, like, selling him to someone else? Bianca nodded. That, or giving him away as a companion horse to someone who just wants a pet. I'd rather than the alternative. What's the alternative? Like an auction? Laura, Bianca, and Gabe shared a glance. I don't understand what you aren't saying, Gabe answered. Another option would be to euthanize him. He's clearly dangerous, and he could hurt himself or others. We've been talking about it as a last resort. You've been discussing it, have you? Imogen saw red. I may be new here and may not have been around horses much, but clearly there is something wrong. Isn't it our job to find out what it is? Bianca interjected. I know you think you have some relationship with him because you've found him a couple of times, but this really isn't up to you. No, it isn't up to me. He's not my horse. But I've worked with enough aggressive dogs to know animals don't just behave like that for no reason. There is always a reason. We just haven't found it yet. Bianca sighed. Well, if you find it, let me know, because I don't know how much longer I can handle this. Laura nodded in agreement. I've worked with horses for years and never seen anything like it. There were certain things that Imogen knew about herself. Stubbornness was one of them. Another was that when she got attached, there was nothing she wouldn't do for someone, human or otherwise. She didn't let a lot of people close for that very reason, and often she gave more than she got. But Fortune needed help, and she was willing to do some research to be part of the solution. The ride back was quiet. Imogen was deep in thought, merely following behind Gabe and Rowdy as they headed back to the Misfit farm, as she had fondly began calling her aunt's home. There surely had to be something that could be done for Fortune. When she returned to the house, she'd finish her chores and then start researching. Obviously, a horse trainer and veterinarian were stumped. She didn't think she was smarter or more experienced than they, but she was great at thinking outside the box. Maybe there was something they could do collectively to make a change for the better. Arriving at the farm, Imogen's head was in the clouds, and she didn't pay any attention as she dismounted. She let out a little cry of surprise as her legs turned to jelly and she collapsed to the ground. The sound of a deep guffaw made her look up, blow the hair out of her face, and glare at the offender. In Gabe's defense, it was the funniest thing he'd seen in ages. He hadn't said much, but he was as worried about Fortune as everyone else. Imogen's mishap was a great tension release. "Well, little lady," he said, touching his brim, "it looks like you've been a little out of practice. You'll probably want to stretch and take a nice long bath and Epsom salts tonight so you don't get too sore." She picked herself up off the ground, already feeling the stiffness in her back, and dusted off the butt of her jeans. She sighed and walked over to where he stood, still mounted, and handed him Dexter's rein. "I can't explain it. I don't know why I care so much about this horse, but I just know there is something that we can do for him. I just don't know what." "Well, I'll take some more blood and see what the results say. Honestly, I think he's the type of horse that needs 24/7 time outside, and he just can't get that at their facility. It's a wonderful program, but not all horses will be a good fit for that lifestyle." "That makes sense. I don't know. I have this nagging feeling like he's yelling at us and telling us what's wrong. I just wish I was better able to understand him." "You have a soft heart, Imogen." He smiled slightly when she growled in response. "You do," he insisted. "But sometimes things can't be fixed. We'll try everything we can, but in the end, Bianca has to make the decision." "Yeah, well, then you need to convince your girlfriend to make the right decision." "She's not my girlfriend and hasn't been in a long time. But as a veterinarian, I can only give practical advice and my informed opinion. I can't make her do anything. Neither can you," he not so gently reminded her. On that note, he turned around and disappeared back down the path to his home. As he entered the woods, he heard, "Thank you for the ride," and grinned when he realized the double entendre.